Welcome to a special edition of Vienna Tyson's TV. I am your host, Leha Anderson, Manager for Media and Community Relations at Dominion. Today we're going to take you outside of the studio to talk about emergency preparedness.
Welcome to Vienna Tyson's TV, a program by the Vienna Tyson's Regional Chamber of Commerce, your link to opportunity.
At Dominion Virginia Power, everyone has a storm role. We have an emergency plan that we drill several times during the year. We make adaptations to that plan as necessary, and then we practice it again. It's critical to our success in restoring power to customers after a major storm event. Do you have a plan? Today we'd like to help you get your plan started if you don't have one in place yet.
In the first days after a natural disaster, you may need to be self-sufficient. This means having at least a 3-day supply of your own food, water, and essentials. And because you don't know where you will be when disaster strikes, maybe at home, maybe in your car, you should have kits in several locations. You need to make sure that your home kit includes the following items: a 3-day supply of non-perishable food. And remember, try to avoid foods that will make you thirsty. 3 days of water, 1 gallon per person per day. It's a good idea to either buy pre-bottled water or purchase food-grade water storage containers. You don't want to use old milk or fruit juice bottles. They can't be cleaned well enough to prevent bacteria growth. Soda bottles are okay as long as you sanitize them first. A portable battery-powered radio or television and a charged laptop. Make sure you have extra batteries for each. A flashlight and extra batteries. A fully stocked first aid kit. Try not to use this kit for everyday occurrences. You don't want to find it depleted when an emergency strikes. Sanitation and hygiene items. Utensils, including a can opener. Matches and a waterproof container. Cash and coins. ATMs may not work. And extra clothing. A good rule of thumb is always to have 1 complete change of clothes per person. And remember, you don't know when a disaster may strike. Make sure you include a warm jacket, sturdy shoes, and a sleeping bag or a warm blanket. You may want to add items to this basic kit depending on your family size and whether any members have specific needs. It's also a good idea to keep a smaller version of the home supply kit in your car in case you are stranded during a disaster. Along with food, water, and a first aid kit, make sure you have emergency flares and jumper cables. Your kit won't be much help to you if the water goes bad or the food becomes outdated. Therefore, it's extremely important that you check it at least once every 6 months. A good way to remember to do this is to check it on the days we move the clocks forward or back. Use any food that will pass its expiration date in the next 6 months and be sure to replace it. Throw out any canned goods that have become swollen or dented, no matter when they expire. Water supplies should be replaced as well, and keep in mind that your family's needs may have changed over the previous 6 months. You may no longer need the baby formula, but you may now need contact lens solution. Always be prepared. It's not just the Boy Scout motto. Disasters disrupt millions of lives every year. If a disaster strikes and you lose power, rest assured that we will be doing everything we can to get you back on as safely and quickly as possible. By having a disaster supply kit prepared ahead of time, you will be better positioned to weather the storm.
During a major storm event, we often get asked, how do we restore power? What's the process? What's the priority? And how do I fit into that priority? So today, we'd like to give you a behind-the-scenes look at what Dominion Virginia Power does to restore power during a major storm event.
Today, you're actually in my storm center, and this is where we do a lot of the pre-planning for any type of major event. I'm responsible on a day-to-day basis for almost 1 million customers, making sure that their lights stay on, number one. We also do a lot of planning work, which requires switching some of the feeders out to make sure that we keep customers in service, because we may have to have a planned outage either for safety or we're doing some new work. We're responsible for making sure that we move resources around or allocate those resources as needed on a day-to-day basis. If one area, one local office, for example, gets in trouble because of a restoration event or just somebody runs into a broken pole, I may have to move resources there to help them to make sure that we have enough folks there to be able to get the lights back on. So we kind of look at the grand scheme of the lights being out and making sure on a day-to-day basis we're here 24/7 to ensure that our customers have reliable service. It starts out really with our generating stations, which are throughout the state of Virginia and also North Carolina. And from the generating stations, we run our transmission lines, which are the higher voltage lines that you see, the really high structures that could be 50, 60, 70, 80 feet high. You range in voltage from 230,000 to 500,000 voltage. Then it goes to our substations. And from the substation, we have transformers in that substation that converts that transmission voltage down to a distribution voltage. And that voltage is the lower voltage that you see on the poles at 34.5. Okay, so the main line is where you're seeing 34.5, 34,000 volts. And then from there, you go to individual devices as well as transformers. Once you get to the transformer, then that converts the voltage down to your residential or your commercial voltage is 120, 240. 122.8 or 277.480. So that in a nutshell, you start with your generating stations, transmission lines, substation, distribution, and then the service voltage that most customers are familiar that we serve the homes with. We have 3 regional operating centers in the state of Virginia. One is housed here, obviously, at Lincoln Park in Herndon. We also have one in our Richmond office off of West Broad, and then we have one in Hampton Roads in our Norfolk office. We also have local offices. There are 35 local offices, and here in Northern Virginia there are 7 local offices. I'm also responsible for 5 additional offices in our Piedmont, Charlottesville area in the I-81 corridor. So in my storm center today, what I would normally have in a major event is myself. I'd have also a person that handles the resources and also a person that handles logistics. A lot of times they sit on the outside where they're making hotel reservations. Believe it or not, that's one of the most critical aspects of storm restoration. It's one of the hardest things to do as well, as to make sure that we got lodging for folks as well as making sure that we keep people fed. So we have an automated system that we use today that helps us identify locations where we have the major outages, and we try to prioritize those particular facilities. So if I've got a substation that's out that may have 5,000 or 10,000 customers, that's going to be the first location that I send people. Now, if we back up a little bit further, if I have a transmission outage like we had during the derecho event, then that's going to be the first location because you get the transmission lines in first, then we go to the substation. Then once we're able to restore the substation, we go to our main lines, and from our main lines, that's when we start making sure that our critical infrastructure are in place and that we can restore those as quickly as possible. And our critical infrastructure are the 911s, the hospitals, and the pumping stations, for example. Those are some of the critical restoration events that we try to go to first to make sure we get those lights on. They're critical to us and as well as our customers. We have 2 meteorologists that work in our downtown Richmond office, and they update us twice a day on our weather. So we have forecasts in advance, a week in advance. If we got a hurricane, we may track 2 weeks in advance, day to day. We look at the weather and what kind of significant event or impact it may have for our customers. And if we see a condition out there where we're going to have thunderstorms, then we'll pre-plan for those thunderstorms. We'll have calls, conference calls among different regional operating centers within Dominion. We'll talk about the response. We may talk about having to move resources and making sure that we got people on standby as well. Prior to any major event, we always discuss specifically what our resources needs may be in each location among the 3 regional offices. And the reason that we do that is based upon the information that we get from our meteorologists, number one. So if we think that we're going to have a significant or catastrophic event, then we have to make sure that we plan based upon previous history and data on the type of an event that may occur. It will help us determine the number of customers that we may have out. So it's an estimate at best for us, but based on our history, we have a pretty good track record of what those outages are going to look like. And by doing that, our meteorologists giving us the most up-to-date weather forecast ahead of time, then we plan to stage individuals, teams, mutual aid, our own teams here locally. We may have to bring in outside contractors depending upon the type of event it is. If I've got a hurricane, then I know that I'm going to need more resources than I currently have here, and we'll identify those resources. We'll put them on notice through a mutual aid call with other utilities, and we'll say I need X number of linemen to come in here and help us for that event. And once that event then unfolds, then we may move those resources around based upon the worst hit areas. So we do a lot of pre-planning ahead of time so that we're prepared once the event comes through. And then after the event has finally moved out of our service territory, then we execute that plan. Obviously that's when it matters the most, is the execution part. The pre-planning is make sure that we are prepared. And one of the first things that we do is we'll send out what we call our patrol team. And they'll go out and they'll look at the damages. You may see them out looking at our pole lines, looking at the devices where we've lost service. They can see where cutouts are open, for example, on our main lines, and they can assess where the damage is, where we have trees that are on our lines. They can tell us where we got broken poles, and all that information comes back to us in an electronic tool that they use, and it helps us assess the worst damaged locations. So we'll look at that information, but we got to go, as I talked about earlier, we've got to go to make sure that our transmission lines are intact to begin with. And once those transmission lines are intact, then we go to our substation. We make sure that we get the breakers back open and we don't have any damage in our substations, and then we go to the main lines, and that's where the patrollers really come in and help us with that early assessment, so that it's critical that we can move the resources in the right location, the quickest and the swiftest, so that we can restore lights, begin restoring lights and executing the plan. When we have major outages, most of the time we can identify the cause of that outage being trees that are in the right-of-way, large trees that come down on our lines that cause significant damage. You know, we categorize our reliability and our restoration differently from a standpoint. You may have minimal damage, you may have significant damage, or you may have catastrophic damage. If I've got catastrophic damage, that could be 25 broken poles in a particular area, and the majority of that could be caused either by wind or it could be caused by trees that are coming down on top of our lines and breaking the poles. You know, once we determine that we've got a trouble call that's out there in the field and we've pinpointed that location, we then dispatch it to one of our servicemen.
Typically under a major storm like that, they give you a device number, and you go to that device number. If it's open, you tag it, start patrolling.
We're basically just looking for what the problem's going to be, making sure that everything's safe for the public and that there's no way that anybody else can get hurt.
On a day-to-day basis, our analysts are talking to those servicemen that are dispatching the work to. They will assign that work to a particular serviceman. He will then go en route to that location, determine what the assessment is from the standpoint of what kind of trouble we have. He will report that.
Typically when we get to the device, it's either a fuse, a recloser, it could be open, or it might, like a recloser could be two phases open and one still hot. Then you have to just patrol down the line to see if you find wire down, tree on it. If the line's totally broke, the tree's completely on the ground, it's not laying on anything, we can typically ground that and put it back up over the tree. But if the tree's on the phone line and have the poles pulled where we can't get our wire back to sag, if it's a large tree where we can't deal with it, then we have to ground the line and call a tree crew to come remove the tree. Then once they're done, we put the wire back up.
We want to make sure from an estimated restoration time that we're providing good information to our customer, and once they get out there and they do that assessment and that initial estimated restoration time is not correct, then we'll adjust it by talking to the serviceman based upon the type of damages that he finds in the field.
I mean, it could be just a piece, the wire to the tree could have hit it and just knocked it out of the insulator and it's laying on the arm and knocked it out, which is an easy fix, which would be good to find.